everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Nader. In this video, we're going to actually start building out our Pokemon command line application project. This was the second project as part of our JavaScript series. This is broken into 3 videos, so this is the second video out of the 3. In the previous video, we went over kind of the requirements for the application and how we wanted to kind of approach this with our mindset and a few tips as how to break up the actual application since it's quite large. In this video, we're going to actually build kind of the first half, I guess you could say, of this Pokemon command line application. We're going to be focusing mainly on the prompts as well as how they interact with the actual node modules that we're going to be importing, specifically the Inquirer package. And then we're also going to figure out how to actually fetch some JSON from the actual API and kind of maybe see if we can tie them together a little bit and get us set up for the next part, where we're actually going to be building out the saving to the file system using some of the Node.js APIs. So that said, let's just get right into this part and start coding. So for this part, I just want to kind of rehash the requirements just so that we have this at the back of our mind so we know what to expect from this particular video. So these were the requirements from the previous video. We wanted to create this command line application for Pokemon. We wanted to reach out to this API right here. So we're going to be doing this in this video where we're actually going to create this fetch request and grab that JSON back. Then we want to ask the user to kind of input a combination, so they can input just 1, 2, or all 3 of these using that Inquirer package. They can ask for the stats, the sprites, or the artwork. So we're going to focus in this video on the actual asking the question part of this. So we're going to be able to grab that user response and set us up nicely for the next video where we're actually going to be saving that data to our file system. So that there's a lot to do in this video, which is why it's split up into 2 videos. So in the next video, we're going to go through kind of this part. I know it seems kind of unbalanced, but this one is also going to be focused on a bit of the research. And I just want to mention that real quick before we get to some Googling in code. I want this to simulate what it's like to actually build an application in real life. So while I do have the answers here on my other screen, and I've already coded this and showed you how it works in the demo, I do want to simulate kind of my thought process as I was building this and what I would expect someone who's kind of new to programming and actually building this for the first time or in kind of their first position as a developer, trying to solve these problems and figure it out, because that's really the intention of these exercises and bigger projects. All right, so let's kind of go to my picture here. So we had this picture, right? So our goal with this app is to do a whole bunch of things, but one of the big things it's kind of us here, and we're directing this application through our terminal to talk through this internet, right? The interwebs to a server. In this case, this is going to be the Pokemon API server somewhere on the internet, and we're going to be asking for Pokemon data, which is going to be coming back to us as JSON. We're actually also going to be asking for image information. So technically later on, we're also going to be getting back binary data, which we're going to have to figure out how to save. In the first part and a bit of a second part, we're going to be looking at JSON, and then we're going to move over to actual binary data. So it's not always going to be JSON, just the actual API's response for where to get information like stats, and then the URLs for the images are going to be in this JSON object. All right. So now the approach for this, I would never kind of look at this problem or any problem similar to this and then just jump right into coding. Okay, so I know there's a tendency to kind of do that, and there is a place and a time to do that for sure, especially when you're prototyping things really quick and dirty. And as you have more experience, it gets easier to do that. However, at the start and generally just in general, what you really want to do is break down these larger concepts into smaller chunks of solvable problems and ideas so that you can tackle them one at a time. So let's do that together. So what do I mean by breaking this down, right? A lot of people get stuck on this. So let's kind of go through this process together, because this process is super important to develop as we build larger and larger applications. So what we want to do for this particular project, we want to kind of, I've split this up at least into kind of 4 or maybe 5 different parts, okay? Now, I came up with these beforehand, so I just want to share them with you, kind of my thought process. What I want to do first is kind of these 2 things. I want to do a bit of research into these packages that we're going to be using on NPM and figure out how they work so that we can actually use them properly once we actually import them into our code. So we're going to be doing that using Google and npm.js. And then we also need to set up our actual file. So actually do the imports and make sure our file is running correctly. Okay, so we're going to do that. Then what we want to do is we want to prompt the user for those inputs, right? So we saw that we want to be able to ask the user questions for the Pokemon name, as well as for these things right here, right? The stats, the sprites, and the artwork. And that came as kind of like a checkbox style of a drop-down selection almost inside the terminal where we could kind of deselect and select different options. So we need to figure out how to do that next, right? Now, arguably, we could do things like fetching data and saving data to disk, but I really think that if we can kind of follow this methodically from kind of the top down, we're really kind of asking the questions like, what is the Pokemon that you want? What is the information that you want? We can't really just go out and fetch that stuff without actually knowing what the user wants in the first place. Now, we could kind of start here, right? In theory, we could just practice grabbing random Pokemon information and saving it to disk. And that's totally valid. If you did that, that's totally fine, right? For me, I like to kind of start top down, very methodical, and kind of go about things. But you could definitely start here as well. It just would be a different kind of step in the process, and you'd eventually have to come back and do this anyways. So I'm going to start by asking for the user information, log it out to the screen, actually make sure that we get it correctly, and how this whole checkboxy thing works in Inquirer, because we've never used it before, and we have to learn how it works, right? Once we've done that, what I want to do is kind of the basic first part. I want to be able to grab that name and then go and fetch it. I want to fetch, right, the JSON data for, in this case, for example, Pikachu. So if I entered Pikachu, I want to kind of ask on my Pokemon API, hey, do you have Pikachu's JSON information? And it's going to respond with that big blob of JSON data back to us, and we can then log it out, right? So this is all using the fetch API. So that shouldn't be too bad because we've seen that before in the fetch examples. What we're going to do in the next video is the rest of this, right? We're going to fetch specific information for Pokemon. That is mainly going to be the artwork and the sprites because the stats are actually inside here, but we'll also do a little bit of that in here. And then we're going to do all the file system stuff as well as tying these concepts together in a final application in the next video. Okay, now we have quite a lot of work cut out for us. So let's just break this down a little bit further before we take a look at Google. So for each of these, an important question to ask is, what does this actually mean, right? So for file setup and module setup and research, what do we mean by that? What do I mean by that? So in my mental model, when I want to set something up and do research on it, what do I mean by that? Well, I want to, of course, import stuff right into my file. I want to make sure that I use ES modules, get the whole npm installing going, and make sure everything's running correctly. I want to make sure that works. Maybe set up the package JSON and all that kind of stuff. But then I want to actually do some research into npm.js, which is what we're going to do together. Specifically with this new package that we need to learn how to use in order to actually allow us to do things like checkboxing and radio selection or whatever they call it inside of this library, because we've never used it before, right? It's always going to be the case that there's going to be some new thing that we're going to have to figure out how to use by reading their examples, reading their documentation. So we're going to do that together. Then what we want to do is we want to start figuring out how to do these prompts, right? We want to prompt for the input. So we want to look up those examples again, right? So this is kind of bleeding over from step one. And then we want to start by kind of asking for the Pokemon name, right? Because we need to know, are you searching for Pikachu? Are you searching for Mewtwo? Are you searching for Blastoise, right? And once we have that, then we kind of have some data that maybe we can log out and see if our actual prompt worked correctly, right? Then we want to see if we can get that crazy looking checkbox thing working where the user can select from these three options right here: stats, sprites, or artwork, or all of the above, or two, or three of the above, or just, two random ones, for example, right? We need to figure all that out. So this is going to be an adventure in and of itself. Okay, so this is pretty much exclusively learning this new package and taking the research that we saw over here and actually implementing it in code in our project. Okay. Finally, to wrap up this video, what we'll do is we'll actually fetch a Pokemon by name, grab that JSON and log it out just to make sure that works as well. And then our imports are working correctly. So that sets up nicely for when we actually need to start getting more information using fetch and actually saving images and stats to our disk, which we'll do after this. Okay, so the point of this is to really show you that you want to really take something like this big, scary looking concept and just break it down and then break it down further so that you end up in a place where you feel comfortable. If you look at things like this, can I import something? Yeah, we know how to do that. Can I look up stuff on NPM? Yeah, we can do that. We can use Google. Can I look at examples on GitHub? Yes, I can. Can I grab a text? I don't know how to do that right now, but I'm sure if I look at the examples and I maybe copy it, but not copy and paste the code or rewriting the code myself, I can probably figure that out, right? I can probably individually figure out one of these things, right? Can I fetch something? Can I log out the JSON? Yes, we know how to do that, right? But when you look at this list of requirements, it's just like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy, right? This is why it's so important to break things down like this. Break it down like this, break it down further like this, and sometimes even further if you really need to, especially if these are even too high level. Okay, so enough of me yapping. Let's just start Googling and figure out what we can do here. So to start, actually before Google, I realized that we should probably do our imports, okay? So I have a little bit of setup here that I have on my other screen that I'm gonna kind of be following. So I'm gonna pull up VS Code and I have a folder set up for my project, okay? I'm just going to use the same file names and some of the function names that I have over here, but feel free to use whatever you like. Just know that you're going to want to change them around when you're actually working through this yourself. So I have a file called prompts.js. I'm going to start with that. Okay. This file is going to be responsible pretty much mainly, plus or minus a few things, for prompting the user for stuff. And then we're also going to add an extra method in here to actually fetch the Pokemon. I could have put the fetch into a different file. Feel free to do that. I just wanted to clean it up and put only 2 files just so it doesn't get too crazy. But let's just see how this goes. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we have fetch installed, right? So if you're using Node less than version 18, what you want to do is make sure that you npm install fetch. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to run. I'm going to make sure I'm correct folder, not ls. There we go. So my prompts.js file, and I'm going to create my npm init. So it's going to create my package.json file. I forgot to do my -y, so I'm just going to enter through all those, and then I get my package.json right here. I'm going to add a type equals module to this, just so I can use ES modules, right? And then I'm going to npm install node fetch, because that was one of the packages that we needed. So that's added for us right there, so we can use fetch. And then the other thing that we needed was this Inquirer package. So let's go ahead and install that. So we're going to do npm. Maybe I don't know how to install that, right? So I'm going to go to Google real quick, and I'm going to say npm, and I'm going to go to npmjs.com. I'm going to search for Inquirer. I don't think I spelled that correctly. There we go. Looks like it's this one right here. I'm going to click on that, and a collection of common interactive command line user interfaces. Great. So 21 million downloads. Oh my goodness, so many. Great. So how do we install this? It should be right here. npm install Inquirer. Okay, so you can copy that, but I'm just going to type it out manually. npm I for the alias for install, Inquirer, right? Inquirer. Probably better to copy and paste it because this is a tricky one to spell. Hopefully I don't get the wrong package. It's a bit dangerous to get the wrong package sometimes, but I think I spelled it correctly there. So there we go. 9.1.4, right? 9.1.4, so it matches what I got from npm. Wonderful. So I have node fetch installed, and then I have Inquirer installed. The other two that you might have noticed was, where is it? Right here. So, oops. FS from FS promises and path from path. So we're going to reserve those for the next video where we're actually going to be importing stuff into our file system, or saving stuff to our file system, specifically the stats.txt, which is right here, as well as the sprite names.png. So like the artwork.png and then all of the like front default.png and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So these are built into Node. We don't actually need to npm install these. And also we're going to get to these in the next video since that's a whole thing in and of itself. All right. So let's just make sure this works. So I have type module, I have my dependencies, Inquirer, node fetch, perfect. So to start, let me just import those. So I'm going to say import fetch from node fetch, and I'm going to say import Inquirer, Inquirer from Inquirer. There we go. I auto-completed for me. It's one of the few cases where I think it's actually very, very useful. All right. So I'm just going to console.log both these just to make sure I actually got them in here correctly. And I'm going to do that for Inquirer too. And I'm going to run node and then prompts.js. All right, so it looks like a whole bunch of crazy looking stuff here. We have our fetch function, and then we have our prompt module over here, and it has a whole bunch of crazy looking functions in there. So we're good to go. Okay, so let's kind of figure out how to actually use this Inquirer, right? So our goal, right, if we look back to our breakdown, is to kind of break this into 3 steps. We want to do this first, and then we want to do this, and then fetch, right? So we just did this, right? We imported the modules, node fetch, we set up our project, we imported Inquirer, we're good to go. Now we can move on to this, right? So I just want you to see for a second, right? Like when you break things down like this and you start ticking things off, it just feels really nice, you know? Even for me, like I've done this like so many times, but even just doing these one at a time, it just feels nice. It's like that checklist feeling, like, oh yes, I'm being productive. I'm doing something wonderful. So hopefully you do feel that, because it definitely is a boost of confidence as you start checking things off, especially with a complicated project like this. Now, let's go to npm.js and do some research as to how this might actually work. So we already have our Inquirer pulled up. I'm going to scroll down here, table of contents. Let me just scroll down a bit here. If you're interested in kind of what the point of this package is, feel free to read all this. This is how we installed it. So we already did that. This is how you import it. Okay, great. I guess I skipped ahead here. I just assumed that that's how you import it. So it's good to know that's correct. Then it says you can do a prompt, pass your questions in here. Okay, cool. And then a dot then, so this is promises, it looks like, and dot catch for the errors. Interesting. Okay, so then it's some common JS stuff, which we're not using. And then there's, okay, so it's like, check out some examples. Okay, good. I love examples. I just love them. Okay. In fact, if you ever see examples for something, pretty much read through them because it's going to really help you out a lot. So I'm going to open that in a new tab to look at in a second. Then we have the methods here. Inquirer.prompt questions, answers, gives us back a promise. Launch the prompt interface. We give it an array of questions. We have an object for answers. It returns a promise. Okay, not too descriptive. Hopefully the examples help. Scroll down a little bit more here. Okay, question is a hash. I'm not really sure what they mean by all this stuff. There's a type of question. Okay, this looks promising, right? We can do an input, whatever that is, number, I'm assuming for a number, a list of stuff, expand checkbox. That sounds good. Passwords, we're not really getting that, but that's kind of useful stuff. That's kind of cool. All right, and scroll down here. Let's see, this is talking filters. I don't really want to do that. I don't know what they're doing there. Not really interested for now. Answers, separators. Okay, cool, interesting. All right, cool. So here it looks like some examples, right? So they have these different types. So that's what we saw. They have the list. Okay, so here is a list, what size you want. Okay, so I don't think that this is really what we want because a list like, I'm assuming that they mean that we can just choose one. So maybe not this one. Raw list, I don't really know the difference. Maybe you can like number it yourself or something. I'm assuming that's the same as list. Expand, I don't think so. This doesn't really look like anything like what we want. Checkbox, this sounds promising. Okay, yeah, look, so look at this picture, right? This is exactly what I had in my photo when I showed this in a demo earlier, and we're gonna see this in action, but this looks good, right? So it looks like we can like check off certain things, and we can have multiple or none of them selected, and we can even have some defaults in there. That's pretty cool. I like that. So we're probably gonna need this one, checkbox, okay? Then there's confirm. Okay, this is like a Boolean, like a yes, no. Okay, that's kind of useful. Maybe we can use that, or we can just use something else. Maybe, yeah, not really sure yet. Let's figure it out. Maybe we'll just stick with input. And this one is, okay, so this one looks really good. This is like a generic kind of give me some stuff and I'm going to use that stuff, right? Yeah, that's great. Let's go with this one. For asking for the Pokemon name, right? So like, what is your name, right? That's literally what we want. Then there's number and password, not really interested in that stuff. And then that's kind of the end. All right, so let's just say input is interesting, confirm is interesting, and then checkbox is interesting. Okay, so let's start with kind of what we have. So let's go over here now. Step 2, right? We want to build this prompt. We kind of looked through the documentation a little bit. I have some examples kind of in another tab ready to look at for when we start building this out. We saw that we want kind of this input type. We want maybe this confirm type. It really depends on how you want to build this and what you want to ask your users. Looks like we definitely want this checkbox thing because we want to be able to kind of select these things. That's a pretty core feature for this app because we want to be able to ask our users to choose stats, sprites, or artwork, right? Perfect. So yeah, so that's pretty great. So let's see what else we have to do in here. We have to get a text prompt from the user. Okay, so that's our step 1 goal. Let's try to figure this out. So we want to ask the user, what Pokemon do you want to look up, and see if we can print out what they give us to the screen. That's like our goal, okay? So if we go back to Chrome, and sorry if I'm too excited, I really love doing this stuff. It's actually just pure joy. It's really cool to see this stuff get built up as you're going through it. So I'm gonna open up that tab here where I had those examples for Inquirer. So here's their GitHub repository. If you haven't seen GitHub, it's just a place where you can kind of store code. We'll look into this in more detail later. This is not the same thing as Git, although they're related somewhat. But really just think of this as like a Dropbox where people store their code. So in this case, the people who contribute to Inquirer.js, all their code that they contribute over time gets kind of updated over here. So it looks like this is their examples folder, right? So they have packages, Inquirer examples, and they have all those types here, right? So they have checkbox right here. I'm gonna open that new tab, that looks useful. Expand, we said we're not interested in. Input, I like that one. And then what was the other one that we said we're interested in? Input and not list. When, I don't actually remember the name of it. Let me go back here. Checkbox, confirm, and input. Is there a confirm in here? Does anyone else see a confirm in here? I don't think I see it. Okay, well, we have input, so let's just go with that. Maybe we can just kind of go based on that examples. So I'm gonna open up, which one is this? This one is checkbox, and then I have input. So our goal is to get a text prompt from the user, right? That's our first goal. So that's gonna look like this, right? This is the type input. I know I'm jumping around a lot, but this is like literally what you'd wanna do on your own, kind of in your own time. I just don't wanna take up too much time in the video. So I'm gonna be jumping around, and you can pause, of course, as you're going through this. So I wanna look through how this input works. We're gonna ask, give us the Pokemon name that you wanna search, and I'm gonna print it out. Right, so that's this one right here, right? This one right here. Keep highlighting too many things on the screen. So that's the example. Import Inquirer. I'm gonna make this a bit bigger. Import Inquirer from Inquirer. Chalk pipe. Okay, well, I don't know what the heck that is or where that came from, but maybe we can just ignore that. Then we have questions. Okay, so they have const questions. Here's the type. Okay, so it looks like, oh, I see what they're doing. So they're basically showing us multiple ways to create questions. So this is one question where it's gonna probably, I'm presuming it's gonna say, what is your first name? And it's maybe gonna store this in like a first name variable or something like that. And then maybe there's some other ways, like we can give default values and then do some other crazy looking stuff here. Maybe we can validate it. Oh my goodness, look at this regex. Wouldn't want to decipher that, that's for sure. And then down here is where we're interested in right here. Inquirer.prompt questions. Okay, so we're passing it the questions object, which is this one. So let's test it with just one. And then it's a promise, so we do .then, and then we get back our answers. So this is a promise because we're going to basically be waiting for the user to type something in the terminal, right? And that could take some amount of time. So this is built as promises so that JavaScript can continue running other stuff in the background, so we're not blocking JavaScript from running stuff while we wait for the user. Do we need to do that in this case? Probably not, but it's definitely nice to know how to use this because there are many cases where you definitely would not want to block the main thread. So once we get our answers back, it's just things very similar to like a response back from the API. It looks like they're logging it out. So JSON.stringify, they're turning into JSON for some reason, answers, and then, okay. So not really sure why they're doing this. Maybe we can just log it out and see what we get when we log out answers. So we basically have this step done. Now we want to create our questions. So let's do that first. So I'm going to come to VS Code here. I'm going to get rid of these console logs. And I'm going to just say const question. And I just have one question right now. So I'm just going to go with that. And I'm going to say that this question, so if I go back to here, it looks like there's type, name, and message. Okay, so type is input. Type is input. And then there's name is first underscore name. Okay, so I'm assuming that means what we want the name to be. And it looks like they kind of have some documentation here, but I like the examples. Let's just go with this one for now. I'm kind of understanding what's happening. So I'm assuming that they mean that this is going to be like the name of the Pokemon. So let's just go with like Pokemon name. Okay. And here we're going to say message. What's your first name? Okay, so I'm assuming that's like here. That's like this part right here where it's saying like the thing that it's prompting for. So I'm gonna say or I think in my demo I had just Pokemon name, which is what we were searching for. So I'm just gonna do this. So I'm gonna say message is equal to Pokemon name, just like that. Okay. All right. So that's my question. Cool. So we basically have just one question in this case, so we can ignore these other crazy looking questions. We can maybe put a default if we want, but we'll just go with the basics. So we can ignore all these. And then we're going to use this. We're going to say inquire.prompt. We're going to give it our question, singular. Then we're going to get an answer. Okay, so we're going to say inquire.prompt. All right, we're going to give it our question. And then we're going to do .then, and we're going to get an answer. And with our answer, let's see if we can just console.log out the answer. All right, my prettier is gonna reformat for me. Okay, so let's just see if this works. So I'm gonna run node. I'm gonna run prompts.js. Fingers crossed. Oh, interesting, cool. So there we go. We got Pokemon name. Okay, I'm gonna type Mew. I'm gonna press enter. Awesome, look at that. So we get back our name as our key, Pokemon underscore name, and then we get back our actual value, which is Mew, right? So I can technically do console.log answer.Pokemon underscore name. And I can even just say, like, I can do something like this. I can say, you said, and I can do like I'll just do this just so you can really see how this works, because this is really cool here. So we're gonna say like Mewtwo, and then say you said Mewtwo. Right? That's pretty great. So we're grabbing this property off of this object that's been given to us by the Inquirer module. Now that's pretty cool. Okay, so yeah, this is great. What I want to do though is, now that we know how this works, once you've tested it like this, usually the best thing to do is to wrap it in a function. Okay, that way you can call it when you need it, and you don't really have to worry about that code running all the time. Because what we technically could do is we could kind of add our, checkbox code down here, but then we would always be asked for this prompt first, right? We could obviously like comment this out and stuff like that, but just to show you what the approach would look like, because it's going to be what we're actually going to be ending up with, let's actually code this out. I'm going to create a function. I'm going to call this prompt for Pokemon. Now I'm going to switch this up a little bit and use an async function. I'm going to turn this into an async function that returns us this. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. So async function, in this case, it's not going to take anything. It's just going to prompt. So we're going to basically take this code and turn it into the async version of itself. So if we say inquirer.prompt, and in this case, what I'm going to prompt it with is this question right here. Okay, so I'm actually going to copy this question and paste it in here. I could also have just taken this variable and put it above here, but since I'm not going to be using that variable after that, I'm just going to directly put the single question inside of here. Okay, now the interesting thing here is this prompt is going to return the promise, right? So let's take a look at how this works. I'm going to say const response is equal to await of this prompt. And then if I console.log out this response, what I'll get is hopefully this Pokemon name object. So I'm actually going to comment this out here. And then I'm going to call my prompt for Pokemon, right? And I'm going to try this one more time. So I'm going to say node prompts. There we go. We have Mew. Look at that, right? So it works the same way. But now we've encapsulated this inside a function that we can reuse if we want to. And it's just easy now, right? So we have this function. It's clearly named. It does one specific thing. It just prompts for the Pokemon. And in this case, it doesn't actually give it back to us. So we need to actually return that. So I'm actually, instead of console logging it out now that I know what I'm getting back, I'm going to be returning this. We can do this in a couple of ways. So let's see, we can actually do we can basically just return response in here, just like that. And if I say, for example, const result is equal to prompt for Pokemon, what I'm gonna get is the promise from in here, right? So let's see what this works, because I feel like this is actually not gonna work correctly looking at this. So if I log out this result, and I run node prompts.js. Okay, yeah, so I get this promise pending here right away. This looks kind of odd. Maybe it's asking me to type. Okay, kind of weird. Okay, so kind of strange behavior now that I'm trying to refactor this to return something out instead of just kind of console logging it right away in here. So the reason I want to actually have this return something instead of us logging it out in here is that we're going to be using the result of this in another function somewhere to actually build upon this, okay? So what we want to do to start is kind of start refactoring this. So whenever you see kind of creating a variable and then returning that variable, usually what you can do is kind of just do that all in one step. So I can just do this. I can say return await that thing, okay? Now this is still going to give me a pending promise. So technically what I need to do is I have to like await this and then I can get that result back out. So if I run this, what we'll see is it will work, and this await in the top level works in this case because we're in a top level ES module. Normally we would have to wrap this in a function. So I don't really recommend you to do this. So we could actually wrap this up in an async function and then call it. But I just want to show you that this would kind of work as we'd expect. Right? So if we really wanted to test this in a wrapped up async function, we could say const, test prompt, for example, and this would be an async function. And inside of this function, we would say const result is equal to this right here. And we would await that, and then we could console.log that result. And then we could actually call this test prompt. Okay, now this is a lot of craziness going on. You're probably looking like, oh my gosh, Nader, like I just wanted to grab this Pokemon name, right? So let me show you this. If I run this, what did I do wrong here? I grabbed node, I actually grabbed something from another package somewhere with autocomplete. But if I run this, we'll get the same result, right? We get Mew coming back out. And this is because we can't use normally await outside of an async function, except for this exception of an ES module where we're actually technically allowed to do this, because as you know, from the modules video, with type module, we can have a top level await, even though that can cause some strange behavior if you're not careful with how you use it, because this pauses right here in our code. So let's not get too deep into that. For now, let's just know that we actually get back this thing from this function, right? So as long as we're awaiting it somewhere else later on, when we call prompt for Pokemon, right, we're going to get back this object and we can actually use it. And we're going to follow this pattern for the other prompts as well. All right, so I'm just going to get rid of this code here. And now we have our prompt for Pokemon, and we can just assume that that's going to work, and we're kind of good to go here. I'm also going to get rid of this over here because we don't really need that anymore either. And now we can focus on our checkbox. So now if I just kind of close that, we have a pretty neat file, right? We have one function in here, and this function is prompting for the Pokemon, and we're waiting to use it somewhere else. Okay, so what do we want to do next? We want to do the checkbox next, right? So let's go back to Google here, and we want to kind of build this functionality right here, checkbox, right? So we want to be able to have these selections, in this case, pizza toppings, but we want to be able to ask our users to grab stats, sprites, and artwork. Okay. So let's try to figure this out by actually going back to Google. And I think I had Checkbox opened up in another tab from our examples over here, right? So I just opened up Checkbox in the GitHub link. Let's see how they actually work with checkboxes. So they have Inquirer imported, then they're going to do Inquirer.prompt. Interesting. All right, so I see the pattern here. So now we have a different type. So type is checkbox. We have a different message. We have a name. And then we have, okay, so this is where it's different. So instead of it just kind of being left with these three things like we had with our input here, right? We need to give it the options, right? We have to give JavaScript the kind of options to choose from. So for us, our options are not cheddar and Parmesan. Our options are stats, sprites, and artwork, right? So let's kind of figure out how we can input these options into this checkbox. So if we go back to the checkbox, it looks like you can give it choices, and then you can have this separator. Not really sure what that is. Maybe if I come back here, okay, so maybe it's this thing. Like maybe it's this, the usual, the extra. So you can kind of give it like a little separator like that, like a section, I guess. That's kind of cool. Maybe we can try that out. And then we give them names. Okay, so we just kind of list out all the names. Okay. That looks pretty self-explanatory. We're not going to do this validate thing, and then the same thing, dot then, and then we can kind of print it out. So let's try this out. Let's see how far we can get with this checkbox idea. So we're going to just do that directly in the file to start. So I'm going to say Inquirer.prompt. And for us, you know, what we'll do is we'll kind of go with this pattern. I'm just going to kind of hard code it directly into this first part, just like they did right here. Okay. So I'm just going to go, they have an array because I guess you can prompt, you can have multiple kind of questions in a row, but maybe we can just have one. So I'm just going to kind of go with the same idea. I'm going to go with prompt. The type of the prompt is going to be checkbox. Looks like the autocomplete in here. That's so fancy. I like it. Then the name of our prompt, name of our prompt is going to be, let's just call it options for now. And then we're going to have a message. And our message, I'm going to say the Pokemon, just to match kind of what I had in the demo before, info to download. And then we have our choices, which is the interesting thing. So if we look at choices, this is an array of objects. Okay, so I'm going to do an array. I'm going to try this thing, right? I'm going to just try it for fun. Let's just see what happens. New Inquirer.separator. All right, let's try it. New Inquirer.separator. And I'm just going to go with what I had in my demo there. I'm going to say options. Let's see if that works. Who knows? You don't know until you try. But then comes the actual names, right? So then comes the things that we're asking about. So we're not asking about pizza toppings, right? We're asking for these ones, stats, sprites, and artwork. So I'm going to say object stats, and then I'm going to say object sprites, and then I'm going to say, I don't know why I'm putting these on multiple lines. I think these were, sorry, name stats, name sprites, right? Name pepperoni, name ham, and then name artwork. cool. I have no idea if this is going to work or not, but looks like, so this is quite a gnarly looking function that ends right here. Let's just test it out, right? Then we get our answers, and then let's just console.log them out, just like we did before, right? Because that's what they did down here. They said you grab your answers and you just log it out, right? So the only difference real here is that we have these choices, and we have our separator thing, if that even works. So let's test this out. So I'm going to run my prompts, and oh my gosh, look at that. Like, you know, this is just those times where it just feels nice. Like look at this. It feels good. You know, it just feels really good. Like when you see this every single time, I don't know, something about it. Okay, so I can go up and down. Let's see their instructions. So they say space to select. Okay, so space. Okay, look at that. That's cool. So I can toggle these on and off, right? Awesome. A toggle all. All right, and then I to invert. So if I do like that, and I do maybe, okay. Oh, that's kind of weird. Yeah, I don't really know. Okay, I guess I can see the use for that. All right, so let me just choose all of them. I'm gonna press A, choose all of them. I'm gonna press Enter to proceed. And oh, look at that. That's amazing. That makes me very happy. I'm gonna try this one more time. Make sure my head doesn't get cut off here. And I'm gonna just choose maybe let's just choose sprites and artwork, for example, right? Press Enter. Look at that, right? We just get stats and artwork, right? So we're getting back this options object, which is an array with the strings, which is the names that we're interested in. Really, really, really cool. Okay, so same thing as before. Let's actually put this inside an async function so we can actually call it later. So I'm going to say const. I'm going to call this prompt for download info. And this is going to be an async function. Again, you can call these functions whatever you like. I'm going to take this. This is the one time where copying and pasting is okay. Your own code. I'm going to get rid of the .then. Okay, because the .then is going to be returned out of the function. That's kind of the goal of this, is to return this out of the function. And I'm going to say return awaiting this thing. Okay, so same as this. We're going to return the promise that comes back from here so that we can await it in some other function somewhere. And then we can get back this array right here if we want it, or this object right here if we want it. Okay. Now, this is probably pretty confusing when you first see this the first couple of times. What we're trying to do is put the control in our hands later on so that we can actually use these promises in other functions. Okay, we want to return these values out of these functions so we can use them somewhere else. We don't want them to run right away or just log them out inside of these functions, because maybe we don't want a console log. Maybe we just want access to these objects. Okay, now the last thing in here is maybe we can just do the continue one, right? So we'll do a continue, and then I'll just say, we'll just do this in one go. We'll do an async function from the start. So we'll say prompt to continue. This is going to be an async function. So let's kind of follow the same pattern here. I'm going to just use this input one just so that we can kind of make this a little bit faster and easier, because we know that works already. And I'm just going to say this is going to, I'll just say for now, I'll do this. I'll do inquire.prompt. And then in here, I'm going to say, actually, what did I use for this? I used a list for this, actually. So let's take a look at that. If we come back here, we look at Inquirer and we go up here. I guess that makes a lot of sense. I used a list for do you want to continue, yes or no, right? So that could be choices or it could be list. Let's just go list, since that's what I have in my example. You can definitely use choices. You can even just use input, whatever is easiest for you. I'm just going to say like a yes or no, up and down kind of thing. So if I look back here, I'm going to look at the list example. So for list in GitHub, they have prompt, type list, name, message, and then choices again. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. So pretty much the same thing as this one actually right here. So I'm going to say, this is going to take an object. This is going to be a type, is going to be list. And I'm going to have a message. This is going to be, would you like to search for another Pokemon? And after the message, I'm going to have a name. Let's just call this continue, for example. And then I'm going to have the choices, which is going to be this array of stuff, which is going to be the list. In this case, they have quite a complicated list. I just want a yes and a no. So I'm just going to put a yes and a no. So that's how they have their list set up, supposedly. So let's kind of, I mean, this is going to be a bit weird, but I'll call this function because it's in an async function, but let me just call it to see what happens. So if I run node prompts, we're going to get a would you like to search for another Pokemon? Yes or no, right? And I can click no or yes. Okay, so that's pretty cool. That's pretty great. I want to actually return the awaited response from this and actually see what that looks like later on in another function. So we're going to return await and then this thing. Okay, so wonderful. So we have basically these three things, right? We have our Pokemon name question. We have our checkbox. So this is our input checkbox, and we have our continue, right? Pretty amazing, right? Like if you think about just already how much functionality that we have, right? By repeating these steps, by looking at documentation, just testing out, make sure it actually works. This is really, really far, right? This is probably like almost halfway there. So the last thing I kind of want to go through is if we kind of come back in here and we look at kind of where we are, right? So we kind of done this now. Like check it out. Like we're checking these off. No pun intended. We checked off the checkbox, right? Next, I just want to kind of go through fetching the JSON just so that we have access to it, and we can kind of try to break this down for our next video when we actually start doing some file system stuff. So to actually fetch something, we need to use this. We need to use node fetch, right? Or fetch from node fetch. So let's just see if we can actually get this to work. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to go to Google. I'm going to search for the Poke API. So if I open up the pokeapi.co right here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And here we have the Pokemon API. So it's saying that we can search for a Pokemon using this URL. So this whole thing right here, /Pokemon, and then / the name of the Pokemon. Okay, so let's see how we can actually get that to work. So I'm going to create some code down here. And I'm going to just say const URL. And this is going to equal to, let's just say, so this is well, actually, let me just copy it. So HTTPS, this is another time where it's okay to copy something. One of the very, very few times, /Pokemon, and then / and then let's just do Pikachu, right? I feel like I always spell Pikachu wrong, but I think that's right. So let's grab Pikachu's information. Okay. Then what we want to do is we want to actually use the fetch API to go and grab Pikachu's information and log out the JSON data, right? So what we want to do is this right here. We want to ask for Pikachu's information, grab back Pikachu's JSON information, right? So if we do that, sorry, I'm flicking back and forth a bunch here. If I do Pikachu and I press enter, these are the results for Pikachu. So we want back this object as JSON. Okay. So let's do that. So we're going to say fetch, we're going to say this URL, right? Then we're going to say .then. We're going to get back a response. We want to turn this response into JSON, right? Because we know we're getting back this data as JSON data. It's not binary data for images yet. It's not just plain text like HTML. It's formatted in a specific way that we want it to be parsed as JSON. So we're going to do response.json here. We did this in the fetch video. And then I'm going to do .then, and then we're going to get back the JSON, and then we can do a console.log of the JSON. Okay, so let's see if this actually works. So moment of truth. We're going to run node prompts, and oh, look at that. Okay, so it looks like we get back abilities, experience, forms, indices, all this kind of crazy stuff in there. Here's our sprites, species, our stats, and all that kind of stuff. Fantastic. Okay, so this is working. We have our fetch actually working. That wasn't too bad, right? Once you do this a few times, it's definitely much easier. But what we want to do is really put this inside of a function. Okay, so I'm going to call this fetch Pokemon. I'm going to say const fetch Pokemon. And this is going to be an async function. And I want to be able to fetch any Pokemon. So I'm going to just say, I'm going to take a Pokemon name as an actual argument into this function. Okay. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to take this line right here and I'm going to move it into this function. And I'm going to replace this part right here. Pikachu is no longer just Pikachu hard-coded. It's going to be the Pokemon name, right? So I can now fetch any Pokemon. Then what I want to do is I want to grab that response, but I want to change this to the async await syntax. So let's kind of unravel this fetch syntax into the async await. So I'm going to say const response is equal to await fetch of this URL. Then I'm going to say const JSON, and we're right here, we're kind of doing this part right here. We're going to say const JSON is equal to await response.json. And I'm going to just return that, right? I'm going to say return JSON. I don't want to log it out in here. I'm going to actually get rid of this fetch out here. And what I want to try to do is I want to say fetch Pokemon. And I'm going to grab, let's just say Mewtwo, right? And then I can do a .then on this because we're returning a promise here, right? This is a promise that we're returning back because we're returning whatever comes back from this JSON. So then I can say .then, and I'm going to get back this JSON, and I want to console.log this JSON. All right, so I'm going to clear out this console. I'm going to run this one more time. And there we go. Now we get Mewtwo's information. You can see there's our name of Mewtwo. So that actually works just fine. So again, the reason why we did this refactor where we took everything out of here and put it into a function is so that we can actually export this and use this somewhere else if we need to. Perfect. So now fetching Pokemon actually works. So what I want to do before we wrap this up is give as a good kind of segue to the next video where we start doing the saving. I want to be able to kind of organize these concepts into like the skeleton for our program. So what I'm going to do is just create a function that's going to kind of scaffold this out, but not do it fully yet. I'm going to create a fetch, prompt, too much fetching, prompt user function. And this is going to be an async function. And this was just the way I approached it. Okay, hopefully you can see how this is kind of going step by step, and maybe not be apparent right away, but as we kind of go through this, it hopefully will make a little bit of sense. We want this program to keep running no matter what, right? We want to be able to just keep asking the user for new Pokemon, new Pokemon, new Pokemon, unless they choose no, right? So inside of here, we're actually going to use these functions that we just created. But I'm going to put it inside an infinite loop so that we can keep going unless we break out of it. Okay, so before I do that, I just want to test this prompt for to continue function, right? So I'm going to say like const, for example, keep going is equal to, I'm going to do an await of prompt to continue, right? Now you can see how we can actually start using these. And if I console.log out our keep going, let's see what we get in the yes and no case, right? So I'm going to call my prompt user function out here. I'm going to run my code. Would you like to search for another Pokemon? I'm just going to say yes. And then we get an object that has a continue of the string yes. I'm going to run this one more time. Would you like to continue? I'm going to say no. We get an object that has a continue property of no. Okay, so I'm going to say, while true, and then I'm going to kind of put this in here, prompt to continue, and I'm going to say if keep going dot continue, right here, is equal to no, then I want to break, right? Now this might be a bit weird. This is a one-line if statement. Traditionally what you'll see is this, which is split up into multiple lines. Whichever you prefer. I'm not a fan of actually doing the one-line if statements, except in a case like this. I feel like this is actually relatively readable and kind of makes sense. If they give us a continue of no, we want to break out of this loop. Otherwise, we're going to keep asking them to continue. So let's see if this works. I'm going to do node prompts. I'm going to say, yes, I want to continue. Yes, I want to continue. Yes, I want to continue. Okay, it's working. And then I click no, and then we're done the program. So this actually works. That's pretty awesome, right? So now we have kind of a loop ready to actually start prompting for information. So to start, let's start with the Pokemon name. I'm going to say const Pokemon name is equal to await prompt for Pokemon right here. And then I'm going to say, I think it was, what do we put we said it was Pokemon underscore name, right? So we have that property right here, name. So we're going to do a console.log of Pokemon name.Pokemon underscore name. It's a bit of a mouthful. And then I'm going to say const, let's do Pokemon options is equal to prompt for download info. And then we can console.log those Pokemon options. And I think they were listed as options is the actual name of the options, right? Dot options. Okay, so what we're doing is trying to set up this loop. We're going to ask for the Pokemon. We're going to log it out. Here is where we would also do the fetch the Pokemon JSON, right? Which we'll do in a second. Then we're going to ask what do they want from that object? Do they want the stats, sprites, or artwork? Then we're going to ask if they want to continue. Let's see if this works. So Pokemon name, let's go with Mewtwo. All right, so a lot of stuff is being printed out here. So this is not really working because what did I do? I forgot to actually do an await right here, right? So it's good to test as you go. I'm gonna Control C to get out of that. I forgot to put an await here. So my function didn't pause here. It actually continued right here. Let me try that one more time. I'm gonna say Mewtwo. There we go, I get Mewtwo logged out, right? So that's coming from this line right here. Then I'm going to say, do I want, sprites and artwork, for example? I'm going to press enter. There we go. I get sprites and artwork. Do I want to search for another Pokemon? Yes, I do. Okay. Now I want to search for Mew. Great. This time I want stats, for example, just stats. Enter. Do I want to continue? No, I'm good. There we go. Okay. There's our loop. All right. So the last thing we really need to do in here is just fetch the Pokemon information, and then we can eventually start figuring out how to actually use all this information and put it together and actually save information to our file. So let's do that as a last thing for this video. We want to fetch the Pokemon JSON once we have this name, right? So I'm going to say const Pokemon JSON is equal to, and then I can do fetch Pokemon, right? And I can give this Pokemon I can give this function just this Pokemon name, just like that, right? That's why we built this function, right? I'm gonna get rid of that console log. And then maybe I can console.log out this Pokemon JSON. Okay, let's see if this works. So I'm gonna run node prompts, Pokemon name, Mew. I get pending. I forgot to await it. Let me get out of this again. Let me await this. There we go. Let me try this one more time. Pokemon name, let's go with Mew. There we go, we have Mew's information. And then down here, I don't know if you can actually see this. Maybe you kind of can at the bottom of the screen. I can kind of select some things. Do I want to continue? No, right? So you can kind of see, sorry, my little bubble head is blocking it here, but our loop is kind of working, right? This JSON is just super, super long. This might be a bit better if I just tried to log out, for example. I think there's a name property in here. So if I quickly look at this, where is it? So it's Pokemon dot name, or it's under species types. I swear there was a name in here somewhere. We can maybe, oh, there it is, name. So we can say Pokemon JSON dot name. We can also do Pokemon JSON dot weight, for example, right? Let's just log those out to make sure this actually works. Gonna run this one more time. Pokemon name, Mew. I want to grab those two, and I want to not continue, right? So we got Mew and then Mew's weight right there, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so this is our loop, right? We're going to prompt for the name, fetch the Pokemon JSON, then we're going to ask them what they want, stats, artwork, or sprites. Based on what is in this array, what we can do next is we're actually here, after we prompt for this, this is where we're going to use these options, use what is in these options to fetch the pictures, I guess, and the sprites, right? And then we need to save them to the local disk, right? So we have a lot of stuff already set up as kind of a scaffold in order for us to get to this. You can see that this was already a lot, right? This is why we're splitting it up into separate videos. It's also why it's important to actually break it down like this, because if we just try to do everything at once, right? If we just tried to get all this done at once, it would be almost impossible. We would be overwhelmed right away. We would just get a whole bunch of errors. We wouldn't know the order for things. So if you really lay things out beforehand, you sharpen that axe per se before you actually chop down the tree, right? As the saying goes, then you're going to be in a much better place to actually start coding this out. So I know that was maybe a little bit fast. This is definitely much faster than how I actually coded it, but I wanted to show you in a condensed video what that looks like with some of the process. In the next video, what we're going to do is do the rest of this. We're going to fetch specific information for the Pokemon, and then we're going to do all the saving to disk for both the text file and the actual image files, which are located inside of this sprites key, right? All this stuff, all these PNGs, and then the actual artwork, which is over here as well, right? So once we do those, then we're going to pull it all together, and we're actually going to be able to have a full running program and have our entire command line application ready to go with whatever Pokemon we ask. I do want to note that I purposely left out error handling in this case because I didn't want to make this video run too long. We definitely want to do try catches around these to make sure that we're actually catching errors in case, for example, we ask for the wrong Pokemon name, which you'll see will give you an error, or other things that might go wrong in this process. Anytime we're using the network, there's always a chance something's going to go wrong, but to keep this concise, I just left those out since we've seen how that works in other videos. So I know this was a long one. I hope you found this one useful and gave you a good setup in order to actually get this JSON data, as well as these prompts going. If you did find this valuable, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear in the comments, did you actually approach it this way? Did you approach it another way? Did the prompts work for you kind of as expected? Did it take you a really long time? Was it pretty quick? Was the fetching hard? Was putting it together the hardest part? What was it that was, at least from this part of the process, challenging for you? I'd really love to hear in the comments. So in the next video, as I mentioned, we're actually going to go through the second half of this really, which is actually saving this information to our file system, most notably saving the statistics, saving the sprites, and saving the artwork once we've prompted the user for that information, but only if they've selected those items from our choices list. So I can't wait to get to that video. I'll see you there.